Hi, Principal Manners listeners. This is Will Parker, host of Principal Manners, the School Leaders Podcast, where each week we bring you innovative, imaginative, inspiring ideas. And I'm here with my co-host, Dr. Jen Schwanke. Dr. Jen Schwanke, welcome back to this 5-minute question and response before we jump into today's show, which is going to be an amazing interview with Jim Van Allen, who co-authored a book based on John Gordon's Energy Buzz. This is going to be a great conversation, but here's a question that we have been sent that I'd like to answer. I gathered this question from a training that I was doing with APs when one of them asked as an exit ticket, how do you create schedules for observing teachers in advance? I think the advance part was schedules in advance. How do you schedule teacher observations in advance? So let's go there for a minute. Put on the hat of that former principal that you were for so long. How did you do it?
Well, this is a question based in optimism and hope, isn't it? Things are going to actually work out like you scheduled. Will, I do a lot of presenting to principals around the country. And what's so funny is every time I say, you guys have, the days that you have a schedule and you have a plan, and then some kid comes in and, says something really awful and that your whole day is ruined and everybody laughs every time. So I think the one mindset you need to have is when you create this schedule in advance, you need to make it fluid in your own mind and in the mind of the teachers. Now, with that said, whenever I made an appointment, a scheduled time with teacher, I did everything I could to honor it, everything. So even if I had a discipline issue in the office, I would say, you know what, this is going to have to wait. I would ask for help from my assistant or counselor or whatever, so that I could honor that teacher's time, because they put in a lot of time and energy into it. So I realize I'm saying two things. It has to be fluid, but you also have to honor it. But Will, I know, you're nodding, you're agreeing, you've felt this. What's your response to that?
No, I completely agree with everything you said. And this question may have been asked because in the training I was doing, I probably told a similar story, but I also talked to them about how important it became for me, because that first year or two, Jen, I was just running around putting out fires, and I would remember like, oh my gosh, the observations are due. And I would just scramble and try to jam them all in. And it just felt so um ineffective. So moving forward each year, I began to just plan further and further in advance. And so one of the things I found helpful for me was to take in the summer. And if you're listening to this before winter break, then take your break in your winter. If you haven't already done this, but I would take the break, look at the numbers of teachers that I needed to be able to get in classrooms and do formal observations with. And I'm not talking about walkthroughs, I'm talking about that concentrated time. I would choose 2 or 3 a week, place them on my calendar, and then I would create a spreadsheet showing which teachers in each week of each school of the year I was going to be trying to concentrate on. They're my focus that week. And I would give the list to my teachers in advance and show them this is what to expect. That it means doesn't mean I won't be in your classrooms when that time's not blocked, but you're my focus for that week. The Thursday or Friday before that week, I would send them an email and just say, hey, reminder next week, you're my focus. Please warn me of a time that would not be good for me to come. Like, I don't want to be there if you're doing assessment the whole time. And so they would give me feedback. And then just like you, Jen, I would try to prioritize being there when I had said I would. And then if the school was burning down, then I had to be fluid and flexible and follow up. But that's what worked for me.
You know what else? A trick that changed my life is when I turned control over to my secretary. It's a huge task, especially principals. You've got 200 staff members, some of you. I used to try and manage it all myself, spreadsheets and calendar invites, but inevitably something changes. Inevitably somebody gets sick or needs to postpone or whatever. And I ran that all through my secretary. She was so good. So hopefully you all have a strong secretary. But then if something needed changed, she would change it on my calendar. And this is the most important part. If somebody called or stopped by and said, hey, I need to see Jen tomorrow at 9:30, she could say, no, she has an evaluation. I'm so sorry. She was the one that could pass block for me. So let go, my friends, let go and let someone else be your calendar guru.
Oh, I'm so glad that you said that. And I'm just going to refer Principal Manners listeners back to an episode that we did with Mark Schellinger, which I think I'm doing this off the top of my head, was episode 414. But in that episode, Mark and I talk about, because he's such a great support for principals trying to prioritize their schedules and their time. And in that episode, we talked about that exact thing, Jen, which is who's someone on your team who can help you prioritize these outcomes and give them permission to hold you accountable. One of my best buds in the principalship, I'll give a shout out to my friend John Boyd, former Missouri State Principal of the Year, State Genevieve High School, Missouri. And he's given his secretary permission to not only help him schedule it, but to hold him accountable. So she can walk into, with his permission, she can walk into his office at any time and say, hey John, I noticed you said this was your priority today. How come you're not there? And he's like, thank you for the reminder. And he's on his way.
My
So
secretary said, Jen, you're supposed to be in room 247. Get down there. So yours was probably nicer. I've been held to the fire a little bit more aggressively. Get down there. And it's kind
well,
of cool too, because it creates a culture in the school. If Jen's in an evaluation, don't bother her. She's doing that. That's a priority.
I agree. Well, as we wrap up this question, I just want to say to listeners who are trying to schedule things in advance, having another person on the other side of you can be so helpful. And I'm going to brag on Emily, who's now my executive assistant, who's listening into this conversation, taking notes for us, Jen. But every day when we meet, she asks me 4 questions. And these are the 4 questions I stole from Mark Schillinger. She says, what are you supposed to be working on? Why are you not working on it? What commitments have you made that you need to follow up on? And how can I help? And just those 4 little questions help bring me full circle back to the things that I want to be doing that I'm not. And for principals that are listening, there are so many things you want to be doing that you're not. And so give yourself permission to schedule it, and then give yourself permission for someone to hold you accountable.
And we all need an Emily.
We do. All right. Well, thank you, Principal Matters listeners, for giving us the quick 5 minutes. And I know you're going to enjoy this conversation with Jim Van Allen. Principal Matters Podcast, episode 419. Hi, friends. This is Will Parker, host of Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast, where each week we bring you inspiring, innovative, and imaginative ideas for your school leadership. This week, we're going to be talking about Energy Bus for Schools with my special guest, Dr. Jim Van Allen. Dr. Jim Van Allen is president of the Energy Bus for Schools. He runs the Energy Bus for Schools program, which gives schools the blueprint and framework to create a positive school culture. He coaches school leaders and superintendents on mindset, teamwork, communication, and culture building. Additionally, he speaks to schools and districts across the country with keynotes, trainings, workshops, and student assemblies. He's the co-author of the book, The Energy Bus for Schools, 7 Ways to Improve Your School Culture, Remove Negativity, Energize Your Teachers, and Empower Your Students, co-authored with best-selling author John Gordon. He's also a professor of communication studies. He teaches public speaking and interpersonal communication. He holds a bachelor's of science degree in public relations from the University of Florida, a master's in communication studies from Florida Atlantic University, and a PhD from Kaiser University. Welcome to Principal Matters Podcast. Feel free to fill in the blanks on that intro. And why don't you tell listeners something else they may be surprised to know about you?
Hey, Will, it's good to be here, listeners. Thank you so much for being part of this podcast. Something else interesting, we are right in the middle of starting up a brand new soccer program in my community. We're starting it from the ground up. It did not exist before my wife and I started this program, so we're trying to bring more youth sports to our community. We love to serve. You heard that introduction. I love working with students and schools, and my family and I are very, very active. So we are, like I need more to do. I have 3 kids and teach online and work for John Gordon running his whole education wing. And now we're deciding, hey, let's start a soccer program. But you know what? Few are called to serve, and I'm excited to be part of that mission along with many others that I'm a part of.
Well, you're coming to me from sunny Palm City, Florida, and I should have mentioned your wonderful family and your children, Brady, Brendan, and Brendan Lee. It's exciting. I'm the father of 4, and of course, I'm sitting here in not as sunny Tulsa, Oklahoma. But thanks for that intro, and kudos on taking on a soccer program in the middle of all the other craziness of family and work. Before we jump into the new book, I'm just curious to know, you did some really interesting research for your PhD. And so I wanted to ask you this question. I wanted to pick your brain while I had you in the room. So we will talk about the book, I promise. But I wanted to ask you, what were some of the key takeaways from your research on the impact of sustainable professional development for schools? Because that's a really interesting topic.
Anytime you're looking at picking a PhD dissertation topic, it is a defining moment, right? It is one where I agonized over what am I going to write about, and I bounced from idea to idea, and had my chairperson deny many of my ideas because it was too broad or whatever the case was. And then all of a sudden, I thought, and I'm like, you know what? The energy bus, like, why not do something around this? Like, it's been part of my, at that time, it had been part of my life for, 7 years, from '07 to, to 14 there, at 2014. And I was speaking to a lot of schools, and a lot of our schools have read The Energy Bus. If you're an aspiring leader on here, principal, educator, you probably have heard of John Gordon. He's written now 30 books, and 16 of them, including the one him and I wrote together, are bestsellers. So, there's a lot of educators that read his books. And we had the idea of starting an Energy Bus for Schools program. His flagship book, The Energy Bus, is read by, countless schools out there because they want the messaging. They want to know, hey, how do I get people working stronger and closer together and be unified, right? The whole bus theme. And the picture on the front cover is a school bus, right? It wasn't intended to be for schools, but schools gravitated towards it. So I was brought in a lot as a speaker. The school would read a John Gordon book like The Energy Bus, do a book study, pretty common, right? You all are nodding your heads out there, pretty common. And then they want a speaker to come in and talk about the book and do a workshop. So I was doing a lot of those. I love those. However, we were getting feedback about, what, we want more. Like, we want, what's next? We read the book, we heard the speaker. Now what? How do we stay energized and cascade this throughout the entire school year? So I started thinking about that. We were developing our Energy Bus for Schools program, which are like material and activities for students and staff that they can use in their classrooms to make the Energy Bus principles come alive. And I said, you know what? I'm gonna study the early impact of this program. We started with 5 model schools. I said, you know what? I can go into one of these schools. I can measure the impact of the program. I can talk to all the teachers of how they feel about Energy Bus, how it's worked for them. And as you're writing this, you're getting amazing results. You're also doing a ton of research, for your backstory, right? For what you're doing for your research behind the dissertation. So I started looking at how schools out there are craving sustainable professional development, meaning PD that lasts the entire year. There's a check-in procedure after the speaker is done. There's materials for them to use after the speaker is done. There's activities that they can be doing in PLCs. So that's what my research really looked at, was why it's needed, what teachers are asking for, and that changed everything for us. Like, when I got the results from my dissertation, it found that this program is working, and it was working because teachers had the tools to use the entire year to build their culture, as opposed to a one-off training at the beginning of the year. And then, who was that guy who spoke here 3 months ago, right?
Yeah.
Did he have hair or not, right? So that was really the heart of it, and I'm excited that the results were so positive.
I am so glad I asked you that question because that's brilliant research, by the way, Jim. And I just have to make an application because the flagship product that I do is something called the Grow Leadership Academy. And as I've worked with school assistant principals and principals and directors, I noticed the same thing, which is I could come in with a book, I could do a day with them or half a day or whatever. But what I discovered is if I could create ongoing professional development once a month, or materials for which they could continue those conversations. But a lot of the times I'm just continuing those conversations, sometimes virtually, sometimes in person. But it's that ongoing work where you build real capacity, and you can really see that development. So I love it that your research actually confirms that practice is something people crave, and it's something that's effective as well. Anything else you want to add to that before I dig into your book?
Well, the teachers, especially, if you look at them, they were really craving that ongoing
Mhm.
nature because they want their time. What do teachers value the most, right?
Mhm.
Besides, summers off is awesome, right? And being showered with gifts and food, which they're much deserving of. They value their time, right? They value their time a lot. So when you have sustainable PD that cascades throughout the whole year, you're showing them that the book study, the speaker coming in, the ongoing support is there to help them. So they're going to listen better in that PD in service. It's going to feel different than others that they have been through. And they're going to be like, oh, okay, I'm actually going to be using this throughout the year. And it's going to not only help my own positive mindset, but I'm given elements that I can bring home and bring with my families as well
Mhm.
and use in my community. Then you have them even more to say, okay, I'm all in on this energy bus, positivity, leadership, and mindset theme that we're talking about here.
Well, and I told you this off the air before we started recording, but I've been a big fan of John Gordon's for a long time, and you guys brought him to our school way back when I was an assistant principal. And for my very first book, he was kind enough to endorse and write a blurb for me to place on the cover. And so it's exciting for me, Jim, to come full circle and be able to hear what you guys are doing, the new things that you're doing with this content, and just to see you be able to elevate that across the U.S. for schools that I know are going to be hungry to hear more. So let me ask you this. I obviously I want listeners to buy the book, but I want to ask you if you can just give a quick overview of those 7 ways to improve school culture and what readers can take away from this new take on the energy bus for schools.
Sure. So the original Energy Bus book, right? I call it the Yellow Book, right? Written in 2007. That's the story, right? That's a story. It's a fable, right? Some of your listeners are familiar with it. Others, it's a fable about a gentleman who's really, really negative, not complaining a lot, and meets a cast of characters that really show him how to transform his life, how to become more positive and get rid of negativity. So it's a great story. The Energy Bus for Schools book that John and I wrote way back in March is the how-to book, right? It takes the Energy Bus book and shows you how schools the last decade plus have used the material to build their school culture. It is a case study approach. It's the how-to. There are strategies on every single page, 10, 20 strategies per chapter, where a principal, a teacher, somebody can look at it and say, oh, I can do this tomorrow. I could do this right away. And they're proven concepts that all of our schools have done. So I actually will mention schools by name and tell their story of how they've used some of the Energy Bus language and principles and activities in their campus to have fun with students and love on teachers and invite parents on campus. So our book is that how-to part. And really what it does is it provides readers with a framework on how you're building culture. So if you're going to do that, you have to start with inviting staff on the bus. That's principle one. And I'll just kind of glance through these, right? But you invite people on the bus. A leader has to share the vision, but not only do that, invite people to be part of that vision. And when you do that, number two, it's going to help you really build a positive culture. That's the second one. You invite them on the bus, and then you go and you build that positive culture. Okay, because nothing more important in schools than culture. Culture dictates everything that you do. But as you're building this, you need fuel. And then the third one is fuel your ride with positive energy. How do we focus on creating positive mindsets among our staff, our educators, our administrators? So we walk people through that aspect of things. We walk them through the fourth one, love your passengers, which if you've read the original Energy Bus book, that's in there. If you've read 29 of John's other books, he talks about love, right? Because love is the greatest strategy on earth to connect people to each other and to campus. So that chapter is filled with a whole bunch of ideas on really how you can love and encourage your staff. But of course, when you do all that, we also want to get into the fifth one, which is transform negativity. If you've been part of any type of school, right, you know that negativity finds a way in. And we want to make sure that we not only remove negativity, but if we need to, we transform it into something useful. So we'll address the elephant in the room, and that's low morale. That's teachers who are complaining. That's culture that is feeling off, and what you do about it. And then that leads to the next two, right? Refuel, re-energize, refocus with purpose. Once you've gotten rid of negativity, let's drive with purpose so we can create a fleet of bus drivers. That's the last one. Create a fleet of bus drivers and enjoy the ride. Because now that you have the blueprint, we got to get everybody together moving in the same direction with common language, common vision, and a common goal to say this school is going to become a destination location. And the energy bus is going to help us drive to get there.
Let's take a moment to thank our sponsors, and then we'll be right back. Everyone talks about the power of data-driven instruction, but how do you actually get the right insights and know the best next steps? The secret is IXL. IXL helps you easily assess performance and determines the best path forward for each student. Whether you need data for benchmarking or intervention planning, IXL can do it all. And IXL doesn't stop at assessments. It also provides you with everything else your school needs, from a standards-aligned K-12 curriculum to actionable analytics. IXL's online learning and teaching platform is research proven to improve student outcomes and is used by 95 of the top 100 U.S. school districts. If you also want to start driving real progress, get started today at IXL.com/PM. Support for Principal Matters comes from EduSkills. Let's face it, many schools are trying to support their Title III and multilingual programs on their own. And if that's you, it's time to take your support to the next level with EduSkills. EduSkills is designed by former educators as a go-to platform for support for K-12 multilingual programs. They understand the value of multilingual students, and they give educators the tools that they need to help all students succeed. From improving language acquisition to boosting family engagement, EduSkills offers cutting-edge tech and services for districts of all sizes. With easy setup and ongoing support, they'll make sure your transition is smooth and effective and that more students are receiving better services. Ready to get started? Visit eduskillsllc.com or call 405-879-9898 to schedule a demo. EduSkills, breaking barriers and building bridges for multilingual education. Well, I just have to celebrate before I dig a little deeper, Jim, the applications of that work. First of all, I'm so excited for readers to get for my listeners to get a hold of a copy of this book, to see the how-tos with each one of these areas and in the ways that you guys have seen this demonstrated over the past 10 years in schools across the U.S. I was telling you about a friend of mine off the air who told me that he had rearranged his summer vacation schedule to be present when John Gordon's coming to Oklahoma to speak here. And I'm just going to call him out by name because I know he probably will listen to this episode. But Bo Brannon is the principal of the 9th grade freshman academy in Union Public Schools in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And we had an interview a few episodes back where he was describing his hiring practices. And it was so interesting because as you were just going down the list of those 7 areas of inviting people onto the bus with your vision, building a positive culture, fueling your ride with positive energy, loving your passengers, transforming negativity, refueling, refocusing, creating a fleet of bus drivers, Bo's practices so reflect that. He told me the story of accidentally calling someone one day that he thought was a potential candidate for an opening at his school, and then realizing halfway through the conversation that he'd called the wrong number. But he did such a great job of selling the school that the person actually said, I live in the community and you just inspired me so much. Can I come by and visit your school? And he hired that person on a cold call. for another position in
Wow.
his school. And so when you were just going through those descriptions, I was like, here's a guy who's told me that John Gordon's book, John is his favorite author. And so I am so excited to have listeners connect the practices with each of these areas because they work. So let's go there next. Talk to me a little bit about because I know you have so many examples, but let's share a few examples that connect back to those priorities.
No, of course. And I think we should start with we can do a few, but like invite your staff on the bus. That's number one. If you read the Energy Bus for Schools, we talk about the need to invite people to be part of your vision. If you're a leader out there, right? Leaders have to be visionary, right? And you also have to be delegators so you can execute the vision, okay, and get people on board to help with that, but get them to believe in you. So the story with this one is I was visiting Bartlett ISD in Texas we're talking now summer 2023. And I was invited there to do a keynote address on the energy bus. Of course, they'd read the book. Hey, come speak to our convocation. Okay, small little place in Texas. And I was walking around with the new superintendent, and he was showing me everything that they were going to be remodeling, and they were going to change. They were moving the football field, moving this and that, and taking me through the whole little campus there. And he said, this used to be an A district, huge football community. Okay. Oklahoma, Texas is all about that football, right? And thriving area. And then all of a sudden, right, he mentioned it, they started losing football games. Some industries left the area and the place really collapsed. And it went to being almost like a D school district. People were leaving in droves. The place is literally falling apart. And I said, and we were walking around. I go, well, what made you take this job? Right? Because he took the job knowing that they were in this dire situation. And he looked at me and goes, hey, I'm a builder, right? I'm a builder. I want to invite people to be part of this mission. He's a John Gordon fan. He's an Energy Bus fan, right? And he was using that work to really fuel him and fuel his own community. And wouldn't you know, like it took him 2 years, but he actually, was strong enough of a communicator and a leader, and he convinced voters and the community to pass a $20 million bond, right? And it brought money to his community, to his school. And they asked him one question. It failed the first vote, okay? Second time around, he was persistent. They asked him one question. How long are you staying? Right? Because they didn't want him to get this bond, build it, and then I'm out. I'm going to Austin ISD, right? I'm going up to Tulsa ISD or whatever it is, right? And the big districts. And he said, I'm here. I'm sticking around. I'm going to build here. And one of the number one ways he did that, right? He's inviting people to be part of his vision. Okay. And that included the community, teachers, staff, everybody. He invited them to be part of his vision, and he showed them how he was going to turn this place around, not just with the money. Of course, we need money to do everything, right? But with his vision of excellence, of using the energy bus to build the mindsets up of his people. He knew that the physical makeup of the school is important, and it is. I would challenge all of your aspiring leaders to look at the details. Look at the plants that are growing in front of your school. Look at the paint on the walls. Look at the lights hanging down, and fix your schools, okay? Find the money if you have to go dig it up. But also he knew that the mindsets that he could build inside of his staff is just as important as the physical appearance of the buildings. So him inviting people to be part of that vision, huge deal for that community. And they're doing great now.
Oh, I love that story. And it's such a great reminder that I also love the story the community members ask him, which is how long are you going to be here? Because you're just reminding me of something very personal. We attend a church that we've been a part of since it began as a church plant. And 12 years ago, when the church brought in the pastor, and he was young, had been a campus minister, and he and his family were relocating. And I remember I got to sit on the search committee, and after he was hired in that position, we were having lunch together one day, and I kind of asked him the same question: how long do you think you'll be around? And he said, well, to be honest, no offense, but I'd like to be the one who gets to bury you someday. And you know what? We've been close friends for 12 years, and he has remained true to that commitment of I'm just going to be in your life, and I'm not going anywhere. And that church is now building a beautiful sanctuary on a 15-acre spot that's going to be
Mm,
built debt free. And so that vision that he had as that younger leader now is the fruition of it is being seen in something that's really contributing to our community.
love that.
But the people of that community also know that this is a guy that said he's going to be around a while, and so we're willing to invest in this. Give us some other another example, if you don't mind, Jim, of one of these areas from those seven that you've seen exemplified in schools.
I would say so. One of the last rules on here is create a fleet of bus drivers, right? That's
Mhm.
what we talk about. How this okay, we're bringing everybody together now. You've built this culture, you've removed negativity, you're full of purpose, full of love. Now let's go out together and do something amazing. And we have a school that we've worked with our Energy Bus for Schools program for the last 3 years or so now, which is remarkable. Schools that join the program tend to stick around because they become the Energy Bus becomes part of their culture. It's not a theme, right? It's a culture thing. We have a school in Iowa, Spirit Lake Elementary up there in northern Iowa, and they joined the program early on. And they do something really unique because they want culture to feel fun and engaging and exciting for their students, right? And they rent out a local theme park. I think they have a lot of good connections and PTA funds, parent teacher funds there, and a little theme park up there in northern Iowa. And they take their students there. And what they did is they put up different energy bus rules in front of each ride, right? And before the students could go on that ride, they had to just do a quick little learning activity. Hey, here's love your passengers, and it was maybe some cutout hearts, and they had to write a message to a teacher, all right, and then fold it and give it. So they were learning, and they got to ride the ride. So there was energy bus stations set up all over the theme park, and they have now done this for the last few years because they want it to be fun, right? We got to go back to the basics here. Like
Mm.
schools, culture, they should be engaging places that are fun to be at for everybody, students especially, and staff, of course. But it takes a leader to say, how can we infuse that here? Of course, we want kids to be safe and learn and you know, check the boxes for the standards and all that. But let's let them have some fun and give them some memories that they were going to want to chase later on in life, right? So I love that one because they do a great job of creating that fleet of student bus drivers that are going to love school, want to be part of it more. People are going to want to move to that area to go to that school because they see how engaged they are. And you and your listeners know schools play a huge role in property values, in the strength of a community, of business, of livelihood. And I'm a firm believer that you create great schools, you're going to create great communities, and people are going to flock to those places because they want to be part of something amazing.
Wow. My mind is exploding with ideas, Jim, just from that story you just told about that Northern Iowa school. I'm just thinking about, okay, Principal Matters listeners, I just had to say this out loud. There's free PD right there for you in terms of like, okay, you could um, take every one of these seven areas and apply that same concept on a walk through the school or an orientation for students or a welcome back staff gathering. Or I mean, there's so many ways I could see this applied with student councils, the National Honor Society. And Jim, I also know you guys actually create content and PD for schools. Talk a little bit about what that looks like for schools that would be interested in like, man, bring it, Jim. Bring what would we experience if we brought you guys here to help us do something like this year long with our community?
Well, certainly, if you're bringing in the Energy Bus for Schools program and the content that comes along with that, first of all, that program can be done as school can go through it kind of self-directed if they wanted to, meaning you have access to a portal, we have classroom activities on there that are grade level specific that all reinforce a different Energy Bus rule that the school would kind of camp on every few months. There's coaching calls for our schools and school leaders. But at the same time, a lot of my energy bus schools, they want to bring in a speaker sometimes to just help that outside voice, right? As you know, Will, just to be that outside voice to help lift it out, get that bus going out of the station. And the way I do that is very unique. I'm a speaker who loves to interact, who loves to engage with my audience. It's activity filled, it's discussion based. It's hey, tables, talk about this, do this, stand up, present. We have station work where they're getting up and they're going to flip charts. Like, it's very collegiate. They're writing on the flip charts in groups. We're coming back together. We're talking about all these ideas. And most importantly, they have a plan when they leave my workshops on how they can use the energy bus on campus in multiple different areas. School communication, parent involvement, classroom activities, whether they want to become an energy bus school and be part of our program or not, right? I'm still giving them that plan to follow. So like my PhD dissertation, right? There's sustainability with it after I leave, right? It's not just, hey, here's the energy bus principles and bam, that's it. No. It's, hey, all right, let's learn what these principles are. Let's engage with them, but then let's put a plan together on how we can actually use them. And then I can use that to follow up with the school later on in coaching sessions. Or if they join the Energy Bus program, it's the follow-up is already built in, right? Because we're meeting monthly with all my schools. So,
all right, listeners. At the end of today's show notes, we're going to have some resources for the Energy Bus for Schools book, the Energy Bus for Schools program that Jim just described, also the Energy Bus for Schools YouTube link, so you can jump in there and see some of this content through video if you want to. Jim, as we wrap up, I like to ask this question to leaders for other leaders, because so often when listeners reach out to me, we may be able to have a short conversation. I've had the privilege to sit across from leaders so many times to talk to them about their work. So I just want you to pretend for a moment you get 30 minutes, or actually, I'm just going to give you a few minutes here, a couple of minutes to sit across from a leader with coffee who's just asking you, wow, there's so much here I could be doing in my school. What's that one or two points that you really want to drive home to that leader of just hold on to this as you think about really building strong community, strong culture in your school?
I would tell them this simple story, and it's a short one. All right, we had a principal wanting to do an energy bus, book study, brand new principal. Okay, and they did it at the beginning of the book school year. They introduced the concept, the books. They had a teacher approach them and say to the new principal, "I've been here before you, and I'll be here after you, and I'm not changing." Okay, this is what a teacher said to a new principal trying to do an energy bus book study, okay, years ago. They wrote in about this. They did this whole book study, did the energy bus. This is before we had the program, right? And at the end of the year, the teacher approached the same principal and said, "Listen, I can't work here anymore. This place is just too positive for me." Okay, true story. This principal wrote this in and told us this. And I tell the story, and if I'm sitting across from you drinking some coffee, telling the story, my message of telling you this is never be afraid to create a place that's just too positive to be there. Don't ever be afraid to push that envelope, because creating a positive culture is what matters. It's not the only thing, but it's one of the main things. And that principal just needed to learn to get the right people on the bus, right? It can take 3 to 4 years, 3 to 5 years, research says, for a new principal to really get their culture rolling, the right people, the right vision, the right execution. Don't be afraid to push that envelope and create that positive destination place, even if you may lose a few along the way, because you'll gain so much more from that.
What a great problem to have.
Yes.
Something I'd like to say to leaders all the time is, as you're working with someone who needs to improve or change, make the commitment that that person gets to remain uncomfortable until they either change and improve or they decide this is not the place I want to be. Which begs the question, and I'm just going to ask you this, Dr. Allen. This wasn't in my notes beforehand, but I hear some people push back and say things, especially through social media, like tired of toxic positivity. I'm just curious, um, because I'm also wrestling most of the time with what does that mean? And I think what they mean by that is a false um, I'm putting on a good face when things are really falling apart, or I'm pretending like things are happening when we really don't, when there's changes that need to happen to make sure things are better. Nobody wants to pretend. And so I'm just curious, because I'm sure that question has come to you guys before. How do you address that concern that people have of like, I want my school to be positive, but I don't want to suddenly be accused of toxic positivity?
Well, you don't want to ignore your problems, right? And that's one of the whole big things with toxic positivity. It's really about just, repeating positive phrases, or reading these books, right? And not doing anything about the actual issues, ignoring the emotions, ignoring the negativity, and not ever dealing with anything, right? It's somebody comes up to you and has a problem, right? And you just say, "Oh, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay." And maybe it's not, right? Or maybe it's not going to be okay for a while, and you're just ignoring the fact that they're crying, or they're really negative, or there's something really bothering them, and you're just sort of patting them on the back or saying, "Oh, it'll be fine here." Go live, laugh, love, right? And that's toxic positivity, where you're rejecting you're rejecting the difficult emotions, you're ignoring the negativity, and it is detrimental to a functioning culture. We have to be able. That's why John and I in our books, we talk about energy vampires. We talk about negativity. We talk about it, and in my workshops, we talk about it. We actually list stuff that are making people feel negative or low morale. We get it out in the open. We address it, and then we say, hey, here are some strategies that can help alleviate those negative areas. And I never say, get rid of totally, but at the same time, manage it, alleviate it, transform it is a good term for it.
I love that. And you're right. If you're actually facing problems, looking for solutions, while at the same time pointing people back toward all of those things you talked about, the vision, the positive culture, creating positive energy, loving the people with whom you work. You can do both. You can maintain that vision and propel folks towards a common shared goal, while at the same time, I call it in school leadership, learning to switch your focus. You obviously have to put out fires. You have to help people. And you have to manage the urgent. But if that's the only thing you're ever doing, then you're actually not also reaching the goals where student performance, teacher development, all those things that you want to be an experience that you would want your own child to have at school only happen when you can put your focus back on where have we grown and where are we going and what can we celebrate. That's got to be a part of it too. And that's a difficulty because leaders are often asked to put out fires.
Right.
But if you're putting out fires without celebration, then you're going to burn out too. I want listeners to stay connected with you. And so not only do I want them to buy your book, but also I want them to reach out to you for more feedback or to follow you on social media, Jim. So how can listeners stay connected with you, and any parting words of advice?
Absolutely. I would love to stay in touch. I'll give them I'm accessible. My direct email is Jim, at johngordon.com, JON Gordon, GORDON.com. You can email me anytime. Our website is Energy Bus for Schools, FOR, schools.com. And there's so much information on there and resources that you all can use. And of course, we're on social media at Energy Bus School, and I am at Jim Van Allan on all social media platforms. So yes, please definitely reach out for sure. We'd love to stay in touch. And I think my parting words would be, it takes a visionary leader to lead a revolution. Okay. And when I was on John Gordon's podcast, okay, which he has an amazing, huge podcast, The John Gordon Show, we titled that podcast The Positivity Revolution in Schools, right? But any revolution that's ever been had in history has had a visionary leader really behind it to make it successful. Look at our own country. George Washington was that visionary leader we needed at the time, okay? And I'm encouraging your aspiring leaders and your principals to be that visionary, to lead a revolution on campus of saying, you know what, we're going to do everything it takes to create this place into a destination location, and have that mentality be, why not us? That'll help for sure.
Love it. Well, Principal Matters listeners, the book is The Energy Bus for Schools, 7 Ways to Improve Your School Culture, Remove Negativity, Energize Your Teachers, and Empower Your Students, written by Dr. Jim Van Allen and John Gordon. Dr. Van Allen, thank you so much for the opportunity to share to hear the feedback from your great book and Principal Matters listeners. Thank you for doing what matters. We'll talk to you again next week.
Thank you.
You'll find free resources like this one at williamdparker.com. Subscribe for our free weekly newsletter, which contains bonus material, and also check out the links for Grow Academies, Masterminds, Executive Coaching, and Keynote presentations from my books, as well as from Principal Matters Associates. You can find out more under our speakers tab at williamdparker.com. Thank you for learning together, and thank you for doing what matters.